So you can think of this sequence text behavior in the text animation category as sort of the one ring that rules them all. In other words, this single behavior is what was used to create basically every single one of these presets in the text sequence category. So let's see how it works. I'm going to go ahead and drag it onto this text layer that I have here. And you can see in the mini timeline, it's applied to the entire duration of the text layer by default. I don't really want it that long, so I'm just going to trim it to about 2 seconds, say. I'll hit O, and then I'll move in my play range out point so we don't play as much of the project. And if I play now, absolutely nothing happens. So not very interesting by default, but check this out. In the canvas, we have a new control here. And if you look down in the toolbar, we see an arrow with no shaft. And the tooltip tells us this is the Adjust Item tool. Earlier, we looked at something called the Adjust Glyph tool. The Adjust Glyph tool let us make style and formatting changes to individual characters. This tool, the Adjust Item tool, lets you create animation on a character-by-character basis. So it's a little bit different, even though the controls look exactly the same. This tool is only available when you have the sequence text behavior selected. So the way that it works is that you just make a change to this one letter and all the letters will animate. For example, if I take this letter and drag it up off the screen and then play, every single letter will animate in sequence, one after the other, from that new position to this position. I'm going to undo that. Another thing we could do would be to say, let's rotate this by spinning it around. Hold the Shift key before I start to drag and it can snap to exactly 180 degrees. And now every letter will spin around. So it's a very fast way of creating some animation. Let's drag it up as well. So now when we play, the letters fall down and they spin into position. I'll drag it back down so we can see them more, and I'll drag off to the left. And now they kind of spin into position from off to the left. So you can kind of get the general idea here of how this thing works. I could also spin them around the x-axis and then have them spin in like that. Now it doesn't look very good because we can see the text before it's coming on the screen. So one option we saw was to move it all the way off the screen so we don't see it. But let's say we didn't want the text to all fly in like that. Here's where things are kind of interesting. What I'm going to do is go to the inspector. And then for this behavior, we have this format section and this control section, just like we saw with the presets. Okay, it's the exact same idea. Now in the format section, you choose what parameters you want to animate. Because we've used this Adjust Item tool to change the position and rotation of the text, if I open this up, we can see that position and rotation have been added. In fact, it's added scale as well, although we haven't made any scale change. I could drag on this. In fact, let's drag up here. And now we have scale changing as well as position and rotation. Okay? So it's automatically added these parameters because we've made these changes in the canvas. Now, you can add additional parameters, or you can just add parameters in here. Let's go ahead and set scale back to 100%. I don't really like that very much. Let's add some other parameters. So you click the Add pop-up menu, and now check this out. Remember when we were looking at text, we had, let's go back, text. We have a format pane, and then we have a style pane with face, outline, glow, and drop shadow. So when we're looking at the behavior and we want to add a parameter, we can add any parameter from the format pane or from the face, outline, glow, or drop shadow parameters. They're all available for animating with the sequence text behavior. Here, I'm just going to take the overall opacity, format opacity, and I'm going to take it down to 0. That will animate it on our text. In fact, let me drag it back up so you can see there's the text beforehand. When I drag it down, now the text animates on, and it starts with 0 opacity. So even though it's coming on from on the screen, we don't see it, which is exactly what we wanted to do here. So that's kind of the first thing, is you choose what parameters that you want to animate, and you can choose them either directly in the canvas, in the case of position, rotation, and scale, or in the inspector if you want to add some of these other parameters. Now, the second thing is, once you have the basic animation in place, you can make all kind of adjustments to it by using the control section. So let's pop that open. And I'll close the format section. By default, sequencing happens from. In other words, from the new values that you set, from off the screen, from 0% opacity, from a larger size. So we're starting from all of those new values that we set and going to the original parameters of the text. We could do the opposite. We could choose 2, and then the text would start out normally, and now it would basically fly off the screen because it's doing the exact opposite. It's moving to those new values that we set up in the format section. It's going to this position, it's going to 0% opacity, it's going to 360-degree rotation. In fact, if I pop rotation open, we see we're rotating in a little bit in X too. That was a mistake. Let's make that 0, 540, and 360. So it's going to all of those. You can also choose through, which means it will go to those values and then back again. So they kind of pop off and back again. Or through inverted, which does the opposite. So it starts with the characters all at those new values and comes in and pops off. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense in this context, but we'll see later where this can be useful. And then you can set actually a custom sequencing where you can set keyframes for exactly how the animation unfolds. Most of the time, you're not going to need to do that. I'm going to stick to 2 here. The next couple of things that are very useful here is what the unit size is. Character means that it's animating every character in sequence. You can see each of them move here. Notice there's a little bit when we play, there's going to be a little, in fact, let's make this obvious. I'll make the animation last longer. And we're going to see a little bit of a pause in the animation when we finish the first word. Each letter comes off, there's a little pause, and then the next word goes off. The reason for that pause is it's animating the space. Even though there's an empty space, it thinks of it as another character, so it's trying to apply the animation there, and there's a little pause. Well, check this out. In the unit size, you can choose character without spaces. And in that case, the animation will smoothly go across every letter. There we go. See, the next letter happens right away, and it skips that space. So you have a lot of spaces. It can be really obvious, and you just set this to characters without spaces, and it makes the whole animation a lot smoother. You can also choose word by word. So if I choose word, let's make this shorter now. Then the entire word will animate off one after the other instead of individual letters. And that can be great if you have a lot of text that you want to bring off, or you have bullet points and you want to bring them on. In fact, for bullet points, a good idea would be line, which affects the entire line at a time. So if you have a bunch of bullet points, is a great way to animate each one on. The thing that I use a ton is this spread control. So let's go over what that means. A spread is 1. What that means is basically that one character is animating, and then notice the next character starts a little before the first one ends. So right now the E is animating off, and the Q starts a little before the next one. A spread of 1 means one character in either direction from the currently animating character. So while this Q is animating, the E is still finishing, and the U is starting. That's a spread of 1. And what that creates is a kind of a steppy looking animation where it looks like each letter animates, and there's a little bit of overlap with the next letters. If you set the spread to 0, you get each letter just pops off the screen. It's a little bit boring. There's not a lot going on there. But if we increase the spread, let's say I do like about 10, what we end up with is a much smoother animation, a much more flowing animation. The important thing to recognize about the spread is it does not change the overall duration of the animation. This animation lasts as long as this purple bar here. If I click on the end, we can see it's 2 seconds and 20 frames. So changing the spread does not change that 2 seconds and 20 frames. It takes that long, 2 seconds and 20 frames, to finish the animation. It's just a matter of more letters are animating at any point in time to get it done, but it has a dramatic impact on the look of the animation. If we crank it way up to 100, then it's pretty much going to look like almost everything's animating at the same time. So in this case, I like a lower number, something like that. And let's actually go back to from, so we animate the text onto the screen. There we go. Okay, a couple more things in here. The direction determines which character animates first. By default, the S is animating first, the beginning of the line of text. If you choose backwards, then the last line of text will animate on first. That can be handy if you have the text flying in from the left. So let's move this way over to the left and have the text fly in. In fact, I'm going to hold Command and the spacebar and zoom down to zoom out a little bit, and then I'm going to move this back down just about like that. And the reason I'm going to do that is if I set the direction back to forwards, what you'll see is we get a lot of overlap of the text. And in some cases that looks kind of nice. The text bunches up. But if you don't want that, if you change the direction to backwards so that the last letter animates on first, you get a very different animation. It creates a completely different feel for the animation. As well, we've got center to ends. And in this case, that doesn't look as interesting when they're all flying in like this. But again, if I zoom out, and now let's move the text so it animates from right in the middle. And now if we choose center to ends, I'm actually animating. Let's do this. Let's go to the controls here under Format for Position, and I'm just going to zero out X completely so the text doesn't move left or right. There we go. And now the text animates from the center out, center to ends. Or by opposite, you can do ends to center. And again, just a completely different feel for the animation. And one of my favorite is random. So the text animates, each one animates on randomly. Okay, a couple more things we'll touch on in here. Speed is constant, which you might think it means each letter animates on with a constant speed. But basically what this affects is the overall animation. So if I set speed to ease both, what it's going to do, it's not going to ease each individual letter's animation. It's going to ease just the beginning and end of the overall animation. In other words, we start out kind of slow, we speed up, and then we end up nice and slow at the end. Let's make this really clear what this does, because I find this a little bit misleading and I would prefer that it didn't work quite the way it does. I'm going to remove rotation so that now we have basically just kind of a fading on with opacity. And what I'm also going to do is set opacity to 100% and just have the letters drop down. So I'll go up and Y so they kind of drop down onto the screen. And I'll set this back to constant. So now each letter kind of pops down. I'll also set the spread down lower so that it's a little chunkier. And you see each letter kind of slams into place. So the position parameter is not being eased at all. They're going from a certain velocity and just stopping very suddenly. So if you change the speed to ease both, it's easing the original animation. In fact, let's, instead of random, go to forwards to make it more obvious. So notice the first letter comes in slow, then it speeds up, the last letter comes in faster. But all these letters in between are slamming into position. What I would really like as a feature request is that each letter eases into position. So this ease is applied to the overall animation, not on a character by character basis. Loops does exactly what it says. It allows you to loop the animation multiple times. And in this case, it looks kind of crazy and stupid, but we'll look at an example of where that may be useful. Finally, just for now, I'm going to mention this variance control, and then we'll look at it more in terms of specific projects. Right now, every letter animates on in exactly the same way. It moves from this position straight down. Variance introduces more variability into the animation. So if I crank up the variance amount, the letters come from very different positions now. And in fact, because I have scale included as one of the formatting parameters, it's adjusting scale as well. Let's put opacity back to 0. So now by adding variance, we've really created a much more kind of random animation by having the position and scale come from all different places. Even though position is up here at the top, you can see letters coming in from all over the place. So it's a great way to take variance and mix it up by adding the randomness to the direction. So let's set this to random. So now we get random letters coming in from random directions. And that can be kind of interesting. With the variance, you've got a minimum and maximum values that you can set to control exactly how much variation there is. So now there's not quite as much variation. And then you can do a random seed. So if you don't like the variation, you click the Generate button, and it'll create a different animation for variable animation each time you click that. So that's a very quick overview of the sequence text behavior. But now that you have a basic understanding of its parameters, you can change any of the preset text behaviors. So as a very quick example, if we go back to the library, to behaviors, to text sequence, and let's just go to something simple like this blur in. I'll add the blur in, and it just blurs the text in. So if we go to the behavior here, check it out. It's got format and it's got controls. So we can see that we've actually got the opacity of the overall characters changing. We've got the face blur, the outline, and the glow. And the reason it's set up like this is because they want this behavior to work on any text you've used. So if you've taken text that you've created and you've added an outline and you've added a glow and you've added a drop shadow or whatever, it makes sure that all of that stuff starts from zero opacity or all starts blurred. So it's kind of covering all the bases there. But then if we open up the controls, we've got these same controls. So for example, right now the way it fades in, its spread is set to 4. So we could go ahead and reduce that spread to, let's say, 1. I'll just type a 1 in here. And each letter comes on much faster that way. Or we could crank the spread way up. So now it spreads the animation over all of those letters much more broadly. Or we could change the direction to backwards. Or one that I really like for fading on is to do center to ends. And there's a nice, simple, elegant animation. Maybe I'll drop this down in the spread to about 3. So the idea is once you understand the sequence text behavior, that you can then modify any of these text sequence behaviors very easily, use them as starting points, and modify them.